I never thought I'd find myself in a situation like this, completely blindsided, heart pounding like I'd run a marathon. For years, I genuinely believed I had a good marriage, or at least as good as they get. My wife, Lisa, and we weren't perfect, but I thought we had something real. That was until I caught her. Not with my hands or some obvious sign, but with a tiny, cruel piece of evidence that shattered everything I thought I knew. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon when I decided to check our laundry, just a usual habit. I was folding some shirts, nothing unusual, when I noticed a small crumpled piece of paper slipping out of a pocket. I froze. My eyes narrowed as I bent down, my fingers trembling slightly as I unfolded it. It was a pregnancy test result. The word positive stared back at me like a slap in the face. It was from last summer, I realized. The timing hit me like a punch. My wife had never mentioned being pregnant, never showed any signs, never hinted at it. And I was gone for work most of that time. My stomach twisted. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. How had she kept this from me? Why? I looked around nervously, trying to calm the chaos inside my head. It wasn't just the test. It was the fact that she'd been hiding something this huge for months. I had a sinking feeling about who the father might be, but I wasn't ready to jump to conclusions. I needed more evidence. Later that night, I snuck into her drawer where she kept her makeup. And there, buried beneath some mascara and old receipts, was a small, worn-out USB drive I never noticed before. I hesitated, my palms sweaty, then plugged it into my laptop. Files loaded slowly, but when they did, my stomach dropped again. Photos, messages, conversations. There was her texting with my best friend, Mike. They'd been meeting secretly. I saw the messages, flirty, suggestive, a clear sign they'd crossed lines I never imagined. There was one photo of her in the cabin last summer, sitting on the porch, looking radiant but secretive. And in another, she was holding a tiny ultrasound picture, her hand covering her stomach, as if to hide it. All these red flags flickered in my mind. I'd noticed her acting strange. Lately more secretive, avoiding my gaze. She'd canceled plans last minute, made up excuses. Now it all clicked into place. I'd buried my head in the sand, thinking maybe I was paranoid. But now the truth was staring me down. She'd been cheating, lying, hiding a pregnancy from me. And all along I was the fool. I felt sick just thinking about it. My fists clenched so tight my nails dug into my palms. It was a lot to process, betrayal on every level. I remember sitting there, staring at the screen, the house eerily silent around me. My mind raced, trying to hold on to the calm I desperately needed, but all I could see was her face, her lies, her betrayal. How could she do this, to me, to us? I kept asking myself that question over and over. It was like I'd been punched in the gut, then kicked while I was down. I knew I couldn't just let this go. I had to plan my next move. I needed to confront her, but I also knew I had to be smart. Whatever I did, I had to do it on my terms. I couldn't just burst in without thinking. This was my life, my marriage, my heart, and I wasn't going to let her walk all over it. The worst part was feeling numb, like I was outside my own body, watching everything happen without control. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, her face flashed in my mind. Her smile, her secretive glances, the ultrasound picture she'd hidden away. I knew I needed to find a way to get her to confess, to face her betrayal head-on, but I also realized that I was already brewing a plan. Something cold, calculated, not just to catch her but to make her feel the weight of her lies. The next morning I woke up early, my jaw clenched tight. I looked at the empty pillow beside me where she usually slept, and for a brief second I considered just walking away. But I was too angry, too betrayed. I wanted her to feel what I felt, lost, hurt, humiliated. I had to get ready. I had to prepare for the showdown. This wasn't going to be just a simple talk. No, I was going to make sure she knew I was aware of everything. I reached for my phone, thinking about how I was going to do this. I'd give her a little hope, a little false sense of control, then hit her with the truth. I'd confront her not just with words but with my own kind of justice. She thought she could keep this hidden forever, but I was done playing nice. She pushed me into a corner, and I was about to remind her exactly who she was messing with. I looked out the window, feeling the cold air hit my face, and I knew this was only the beginning. The game was on now. I didn't know what would come next, but I was ready to face whatever it was. And she was going to regret ever crossing me. That much I knew. I spent the next couple of days piecing together my plan. I couldn't just storm in there and accuse her outright. No, that would backfire. I needed her to slip up, to let her guard down just enough for me to catch her in the act or get her to confess without her realizing how much I already knew. The first step was to keep her close, pretend everything was normal. I did. Want her to sense my suspicion yet. I kept my tone casual, even friendly. I asked her about little things, how her day was, whether she'd be home for dinner. But behind every word I was counting her reactions, watching for the tiniest tremor in her voice or a flicker of guilt in her eyes. It took every ounce of my composure, but I managed to stay calm, at least outwardly. One night I decided to test her. I casually brought up the idea of a weekend getaway, something to see if she'd get defensive or try to hide her plans. We should go to that lakeside cabin again, I said, feigning enthusiasm. It's been a while and I thought it'd be nice to escape for a couple of days. She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Yeah, that sounds good. I watched her carefully. Her hands clutched a glass of water a little too tightly. Her eyes darted away from mine for just a second, enough to tell me she was hiding something. That was when it clicked. She knew I was onto her and she was trying to cover it up. That's when I realized I had to be more direct but still subtle enough not to blow my cover. I started planting seeds of doubt, asking her about her whereabouts last summer, about any strange feelings she might have had. She brushed me off with a vague excuse, but I noticed her voice cracking just a little. Meanwhile, I dug around. More digging meant more proof, and I needed that proof to make the final move. I knew I'd get her to confess eventually. I could feel the tension building every time she touched her phone or glanced at her reflection in the mirror, trying to smooth her face into something innocent. But I wasn't buying it anymore. One evening, I went into the garage, pretending to look for some tools, but really, I was just taking mental notes. I saw her purse sitting on the kitchen table, and I grabbed it without her noticing. Inside, I found her phone, and I knew I had to check it. I didn't want to invade her privacy, but at that point I'd crossed the line myself. I unlocked it. She'd left her password open, probably thinking I wouldn't snoop. I scrolled through her messages again, and I found more evidence, flirtatious texts with Mike, plans to meet up, and more cryptic hints about a surprise in the summer. My stomach clenched as I read. They had been planning something, maybe even the pregnancy. I could hardly breathe. All I could do was clutch her phone tighter, feeling the heat of betrayal burning through me. I knew I couldn't keep this inside anymore. The only thing left was to confront her with everything I'd uncovered. I planned to do it in a way that she wouldn't expect, something calm, calculated. I wanted her to realize that I knew everything, her secrets, her lies, her betrayal. I was done playing nice. I was done waiting for her to confess. The night finally arrived when I decided I'd do it. I sat across from her at the dinner table, my hands trembling slightly but my voice steady. I looked her straight in the eyes and said, "Lisa, I found the test, the ultrasound picture, your messages. I know everything." Her face went pale, her eyes darted around as if trying to find an escape route. She opened her mouth to speak, but I held up my hand. "This isn't just about the cheating," I said, voice low but firm. "It's about the lies, the hiding, the betrayal. I want answers now, and I want the truth." Her lips trembled and she looked like she might crumble. That's when I saw her trying to hold her composure, but it was too late. The game was over and I knew she had no choice but to admit everything if she wanted to keep some facade of dignity. Just then she broke down and finally blurted out, "It was a mistake. I didn't mean for you to find out like this. I was scared." That's when I realized that her remorse was fake. She was just trying to save herself. But I didn't care anymore. I'd heard enough lies. I'd seen enough proof. Now I was just waiting for her to finish her confession so I could decide what came next. I already had the wheels turning in my head about how I was going to handle the fallout from here. I knew it was going to get messy, and I was ready for that. The only thing I cared about now was making her feel the consequences of her actions, one way or another. That night after she finally cracked and started spilling her version of the truth, I sat there with a cold feeling spreading through my chest. I didn't feel relief. I felt emptier than I ever had. Her voice cracked as she admitted to everything: how she'd been seeing Mike, how she'd gotten pregnant, how she'd planned to keep it from me. She looked like a trapped animal, cornered and trembling, but I just sat there, silent, processing it all. I could feel my jaw tightening with every word she said, my fists clenched so tight my knuckles turned white. I didn't want to yell, I didn't want to scream. That wouldn't serve me. No, I wanted her to understand that her actions had consequences, that her betrayal wasn't going to get swept under the rug, not anymore. I had to show her I was serious, that I'd already started planning my revenge. When she finished, I finally spoke, voice low and steady. Did you really think you could hide this forever? That I wouldn't find out, or that I'd just quietly walk away? Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't feel a single ounce of sympathy. I was too furious. Look, I said, you lied, you cheated, and you kept a secret that changes everything. I want you to understand something right now. You've pushed me past my limit. This isn't just a breakup. This is about who you are, what you've done, and I'm not going to let you walk away without consequences. She looked at me helpless, her breathing ragged. Please, I didn't mean for it to go this far. I was scared. I still am. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it made my stomach churn. I knew then that I had to act fast, that I couldn't give her the chance to spin her stories or manipulate the situation. I told her I needed some time to think, but in truth, I'd already made up my mind. I knew I wanted revenge. Not the petty kind, something calculated, something she'd never see coming. I needed to make her truly feel the pain she'd caused, and I wasn't going to stop until I did. Once she was in bed, I started laying out my plan. I knew her weak spots, her secrets, her vulnerabilities. This wasn't going to be a reckless outburst or a shouting match. No, I wanted her to see that I was in control, that I had already taken steps to even the score. I was going to make her regret every lie, every betrayal, every lie that had pushed us apart. The key was patience. I would let her think she was safe, that she could still manipulate the situation. While she slept, I made a few calls, arranged a few things. I wanted her to know that I was serious about exposing her, that I wasn't just going to walk away and pretend everything was okay. No, I was going to make sure her lies caught up with her. I also gathered some more evidence, screenshots of her texts, details about her plans, even some financial records that hinted at her preparations for the future she'd been planning with Mike. I kept everything organized, ready for the confrontation I knew would come. That night, lying in bed, I felt a strange mix of calm and chaos. My mind kept replaying her words, her tears, her promises of regret. But underlying all that was a simple, burning resolve. She was going to pay for what she did. I didn't exactly know how. I was going to do it yet, but I knew it would be something she'd never anticipate. Morning would come soon enough, and I was going to be ready. Whenever she thought she was safe, I'd strike. Whatever I did, I already knew it wouldn't be some emotional outburst. It'd be calculated, cold, and precise. I was done with being the forgiving husband. Betrayal like this deserved more than words. It deserved consequences, and I was about to deliver them. I sat up in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of it all settle in my chest. Every breath I took was slow, deliberate. For the first time in days, I felt in control. The game was just beginning, and she was about to find out what happens when you push someone too far. The day started with a strange clarity I hadn't felt in years, like I'd finally reset my mental state after years of being too passive, too trusting. I knew I'd need to move carefully, so I kept my plan close to my chest. I had already decided that I wouldn't confront her directly again until I was ready. Instead, I spent the day setting up. My next move, gathering everything I'd need to make her really understand just how badly she'd screwed up. I focused on the evidence I'd collected, screenshots, messages, the ultrasound photo, and made copies of everything. I knew that once she realized I was prepared, her sense of control would weaken. I called a lawyer to ask about my rights, just to familiarize myself with the legal side of things. I also arranged for a private investigator to do some discreet background work. I wasn't planning on rushing into anything reckless. I just wanted to know her weak points, who she was really hiding behind that fake smile. As evening rolled around, I started preparing the scene. I took some of her most intimate texts and set them up on my phone, ready to show her if she tried to deny or manipulate her way out of it. I had her phone still, and I knew I could use it as leverage if necessary. I also got a friend to come over who knew some of her secrets from the past, someone I trusted who could help me make sure I was playing this right. I kept thinking about how I wanted the confrontation to go. I wasn't interested in yelling or throwing accusations wildly. I wanted her to feel cornered, vulnerable, and helpless. That's when I decided I'd let her believe she still had some control. Then I'd flip the switch. Later that night, she came home late, her face tired and tense. It was obvious she'd been anxious all day, probably guessing what I was up to. She tried to act normal, making small talk, something about how she went to the grocery store, how she'd been busy with her doctor's appointment last minute. I nodded, pretending to believe her, but I knew better. I checked her eyes, her body language. She was hiding something, and I was about to force it out into the open. As she sat on the couch, I finally pulled out my phone and started showing her the evidence. I kept my voice calm even, but every word was deliberate. "You see this?" I asked, showing her the messages with Mike. "You've been lying to me for months, planning this for what, a baby or a new life with him?" Her eyes widened, but she said nothing. Instead, she looked away, trying to distract herself. I pressed further. "And the ultrasound, the pregnancy test, when you hid those from me, I knew I was right. You've been orchestrating this whole thing behind my back." I watched her face closely. Her jaw clenched, her fingers trembled. She was trying to keep her composure, but I could see her slipping. "I've got everything," I said softly, "and I'm not leaving here without you understanding exactly what you've done." I knew I had her trapped now, caught in the web of her lies. Her breathing was ragged, and her eyes darted around as if looking for an escape. That's when I pulled out the last card, an envelope with a copy of the ultrasound photo, the text messages, and the proof of her plans. I set it on the table. "You can deny all you want, but I've got the proof, and I will use it." Her eyes, shiny with tears, finally looked at me directly. "Please," she whispered, voice breaking, "don't do this." I was scared, and I thought I'd lose everything, my family, my life. "I didn't mean to hurt you." That's when I felt my stomach turn, not from anger, more like disgust. She was begging now, but I knew better. I knew she'd been planning this for months. She'd been lying to me for just as long. I took a deep breath, feeling my hands shaking faintly, and said, "That's too late for apologies. You've already crossed the line." I told her I'd be back tomorrow and left her sitting on the couch, a wreck of her own making. As I walked out, I looked back once, knowing I made my decision. She was finally starting to see that I was serious. I was done being the forgiving husband. I was done pretending everything was okay. That night I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat in my car outside, staring at the house, feeling a strange mix of relief and anticipation. I'd laid the groundwork for what was coming next. I knew she'd try to spin her story, deny everything, or manipulate the situation. But I was prepared. I was going to make her see the full extent of her betrayal, and she'd never forget it. The pieces were in place. Now, it was just a matter of waiting for her to realize she'd been caught, and that I wasn't going to let her walk away without consequences. The next morning, I woke up before dawn, feeling a strange sense of clarity. I'd spent the night reviewing everything, making sure I was ready. Today was the day I was going to finally put my plan into motion. I knew she'd be expecting some kind of emotional explosion, but I had different plans. I wanted her to feel the weight of her betrayal, to see that I was serious, that she had pushed me too far. I left the house quietly, took a short drive to a nearby park, and parked where I could see the house but keep my distance. I had everything I needed, an envelope with all the evidence, her phone, and a plan to execute. I wanted her to realize that I knew everything, but I also didn't want to give her the satisfaction of knowing I was rushing to confront her. No, I was going to let her stew in her guilt, and then I'd act. At around 9 a.m., I saw her come outside, looking tense, clutching her purse like a lifeline. She headed straight to her car, and I followed at a distance, careful not to be seen. I watched her drive off, probably to meet Mike, based on what I'd seen on her phone. That was fine. I knew exactly where she was headed. I'd already arranged for a friend to be nearby, ready to capture everything on camera. My heart was pounding, but my mind was clear. I took out the envelope, checked the contents once more, and then pulled out her phone. I had already unlocked it last night, so I knew I could access her messages again if needed. I kept the evidence ready to show her, but I wanted her to believe she still had some control, at least until I was ready. I waited for her to be out of sight, then approached her house. Quietly, I slipped in through the back door. Her routine was predictable enough. I moved swiftly, placing the evidence in a hidden spot where she'd find it later. Then I left her phone on the kitchen table, deliberately leaving it unlocked. I wanted her to discover it herself, to realize that I knew everything without even needing to look for it. I took a deep breath as I slipped out the back, feeling a surge of adrenaline. I knew she'd find the evidence sooner or later. When she did, her world would start to crumble. I had already made sure the evidence was irrefutable: screenshots, the ultrasound picture, her secret plans. All I needed now was for her to realize she'd been caught. I drove back to the house and waited, knowing that she'd soon come home and discover the truth. I could picture her face: shock, disbelief, maybe even panic. That's what I wanted. I wanted her to see that her lies had been exposed and there was no way to spin her way out of it anymore. When she finally walked in, I was sitting on the couch, pretending to be relaxed. She looked at me, her eyes flickering with worry. I could tell she had no idea what I'd done. I looked her in the eyes and said, "I hope you're ready to talk, Lisa, because I've already seen everything, and there's no running from this now." Her face went pale and she stammered, "What are you talking about?" I just shook my head and handed her the envelope. All of it, the proof, the messages, the ultrasound, the plans. You thought you could hide it forever, but I found out, and I don't think you understand just how deep this cuts. Her hands trembled as she opened the envelope and her eyes darted from the ultrasound picture to the messages, finally settling on her phone still lying on the table. For a moment she couldn't speak. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Then she looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. "Please don't do this," she begged, voice trembling. I was scared and I thought I'd lost everything. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I felt a cold fury rising. I was done listening to her pleas. I wanted her to feel the full weight of her betrayal, to see that her efforts to manipulate me or smooth things over were useless now. I stood up slowly, watching her wring her hands, her face soaked with tears. "Too late," I said softly but firmly. "You lied, you cheated, and you kept a secret that tore us apart. You think I'm going to forgive you? Not a chance. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine." I paused, letting her absorb gravity of my words. "You're going to pack your things and leave today," I continued. "I want the keys to the house, the car, everything. You're not staying here anymore." Her eyes widened with shock, but I was already walking toward the door. I needed her gone. I needed her out of my life. As she sat crying on the couch, I grabbed the keys from the hook by the door and handed them to her. "Take your things and get out. Don't come back." I watched her stumble to her feet, clutching the keys like a lifeline. She looked at me one last time, her face a mess of despair and regret, then hurried out the door without a word. I closed the door behind her, leaned against it for a moment, and finally exhaled. It was over. All of it, the lies, the betrayal, the heartbreak, was sealed in that instant. I felt a strange mixture of relief and emptiness. I'd done what I had to do, and I knew there was no turning back. Walking back into the house, I looked around the empty rooms, feeling a sense of finality settle over me. I'd take some time to heal, to figure out what was next. But for now, I'd start by removing her from my life completely. I picked up her phone, looked at the last message she'd sent: Mike, see you tonight, and deleted everything. That's when it hit me. She thought she could hide her betrayal forever, but I'd shown her otherwise. No one gets away with that kind of betrayal in my world. As I handed over the keys, I knew one thing for sure. I'd learned a brutal lesson. Trust is fragile and secrets will always find a way out. Never again would I be blindsided like this. The pain still lingers, but at least now I own my story, and I'm finally taking control. The house felt eerily quiet after she left. I stood there, watching the empty doorway, feeling the weight of everything that just happened. For a while, I let myself breathe, trying to process what I'd just done. It was a long, painful road to get here, but I finally took control. No more hiding, no more pretending. The betrayal was out in the open and she was gone. That's what mattered. I sat down on the couch, my hands resting on my knees. My mind kept replaying every detail. The moment I found the test, her trembling voice, the look in her eyes when I confronted her, the way her face crumpled when I handed her the evidence. I felt numb yet oddly relieved. For the first time in months, I could breathe without that gnawing suspicion gnawing at me. I'd taken back what was mine, my sanity, my dignity, my life. I knew it would take time to heal, maybe a long time. The sting of betrayal doesn't just vanish overnight. I'd be angry, hurt, and maybe even broken for a while. But I was also free. Free from the lies, the secrets, the betrayal. And that was worth something. I had finally reclaimed my sense of control, even if it meant losing everything I thought I knew about her and us. Looking around the empty rooms, I realized I'd have to rebuild from scratch. No more pretending everything was fine. No more pretending I was okay with the person she'd become. I had to face the truth, and the truth was that I deserved better. I deserved honesty, loyalty, respect, and I wasn't going to settle for anything less anymore. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small USB drive I'd hidden away, the one containing her secrets. It felt heavy in my hand, a symbol of her lies and my newfound strength. I decided I'd do one last thing, delete everything, all the proof of her betrayal, so I could finally start to let go. I plugged it into my computer, watched the files load, and then clicked delete. A small act, but it felt like burning away the last remnants of her deception. As I sat back, I thought about all the lessons I'd learned. Trust is fragile, secrets always come out. Sometimes you have to take matters into your own hands to protect what's left of yourself. I'd been blindsided, yes, but I'd also taken control of my future. No longer would I be a victim of her lies. From now on, I'd be the one steering my life. In the end, I realized that revenge isn't about hurting someone else. It's about reclaiming your power. It's about taking the pain, the betrayal, and transforming it into something that makes you stronger. I didn't need her validation or her apology. I just needed to know I was still standing. And I was. So I got up, took a deep breath, and looked out the window at the empty street. The sun was setting, casting a faint orange glow across the sky. It felt symbolic, an ending, a new beginning. I finally understood that the worst betrayals can sometimes lead to the greatest clarity. I'd learned to trust myself again, to rebuild what was broken, and to find peace in my own terms. This chapter is closed now. I walked out that door, leaving behind the past, and stepped into whatever comes next. Alone, yes, but finally free. And that, I think, is the real victory.